right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to I Love You Tea with Trashellie, not sponsored by Yui Hirahara. I'm Elle.
And I'm Ashley.
And this is a little podcast that we record in the I Love You Discord server. And so for today, we're going to be kind of continuing off of our topic from last week about theories, but instead of talking about theories in general and how you evaluate them, we're going to be talking about a few specific theories that we subscribe to and kind of detailing through them.
Yeah. I feel like these theories in particular really set a lot of the tone for the story of I Love You and give a much deeper read into things that at the time we were first reading them wasn't necessarily readily apparent at the time. And just kind of how we've watched these theories evolve and how they continue to grow.
And so I think we're going to be starting with a little theory that I like to call the flashback color theory. So this is kind of a theory about how Quimchee uses um, color in her flashbacks to convey emotion and memory integrity. So the baseline of this theory is that the colored hint of a flashback, like the color palette, indicates kind of the emotional connotation of the memory and the way that the person processes the memory, while the intensity of that color, how faded out or vivid it is, conveys the integrity of the memory.
Right. Something that Quimchee has reiterated many times, as psychology also tells us, is that nobody has an absolutely perfect memory. None of the memories that we see in I Love You are meant to be assumed as a hard fact, basically. Um, and I think we saw this most recently when we had Kousuke's flashback to the night that Noel was taken away.
Yeah, so I want to elaborate on this idea of memory accuracy. So in addition to Quimchee saying that no one's memory is 100% accurate, we know two things that kind of give us a baseline for like the extremes of that. So
Mhm.
one thing that she said is that Dieter has the most accurate memory out of everybody. And I think that she even said that his memory is accurate. So we can kind of consider him the accuracy standard, the baseline standard for what is an accurate memory through a character's eyes. While Shin-Ae is kind of the 0 point for a memory, where our girl has some issues.
Just,
She
just a few brain issues, it's nothing big, don't worry.
Yeah, we know that she is a little bit dense, has some trouble remembering things, and she also has been drugged in the series and has we've been able to explicitly see her quality of memory and how it changes, and her tell us how accurately how much integrity she feels like her memory has. So for Dieter, when we look at him, he has memories that really just look like the comic themselves. We see this in chapter 99 when he recounts the first time that he met Noel, which, this is an event from several years ago. It is theoretically an event that carries emotion for him because we know how important his friendship with Noel is to him and how much he was going through moving to Korea out of Germany. But the memory itself, which is theoretically a very accurate memory, as Quimchee has said about Dieter, is really just the same as a normal story panel.
Right.
And in a pretty stark contrast to that, when we look at Shin-Ae's memory, we have this really strong black and white grayscale. There's barely even grayscale in it, where she constantly has trouble remembering things. She says that her memory of the past is kind of faulty, and she really doesn't understand a lot of what happened in her past. Like she knows what happened, but she doesn't kind of understand the baseline behind it. And so her drained color in her memories, to me, indicates that it's that kind of lack of memory integrity. She's not sure of what she remembers. She knows that she's not sure of what she remembers, and she just has a hard time conjuring up those details. Like the black and white is the best that she can do. Not
Right.
necessarily black and white, but that grayscale.
I think I'd like to point out too that this is really supported by that episode 64 and 65 when Shin-Ae is trying to recount what actually happened that night. Obviously at that time we accredit this as being like, oh, we're watching the point where Shin-Ae's recollection when the drugging took effect, how that started to fade out. But it really supports what you point out about that color usage, how the earliest memories she has of that night are the ones that are clearest and most colored. But as you go through the memories through the night, as she gets to the point that she's been drugged and it starts to take effect, that color completely drains out, and we start to see that the images themselves start to become very blurry and fuzzy.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's like that really encapsulates that one axis that we have of the memory integrity.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like you were kind of talking about with Kousuke in 210, we actually get some really interesting veers off of the scale with Kousuke. So, you know, Dieter's the 100 point and Shin-Ae's the 0 point. Kousuke sometimes goes to like 120 or -20. Um, and so the thing that tipped me off to kind of the way that Quimchee is using memory and like color and integrity was, like you said, 210, where when we compare 210 to most other panels in the comic, but especially panels where characters are having a memory, it's so incredibly vivid. Like
Right.
it's almost like it's in a different like art world, like artistic world, where just everything, it's the color is so vibrant, the panels are so vivid. Like his memory of this event, it's almost like he's not even remembering it, but like he's watching it, you know.
Right. Like
And
he
so
sees things with such clarity compared to what other memories show.
yes,
And I think, like you said, that was the biggest tip, is that for like it obviously it is that this was such a traumatic night that we could potentially argue that, well, of course he remembers this night with such vivid detail because this is such a big point in his life. But with everything that we know about Kousuke and Yui, as well as what you have pointed out about memory, about the fact that Dieter is our baseline, the fact that our colors are never, ever, ever this vivid, even within the regular panels of our story, that alone gives us that sense that something about this is not normal.
exactly. It's not normal. Nobody else has memories like this. And interestingly, for at the very beginning of it, it actually is, you know, blurred. Like all of the dialogue is, at least I think it's the
Mm-hmm.
dialogue, is blurred, and like it's not in quite that vivid scene. And then the moment when it all clears up is the moment where Yui um puts her hand on Kosuke
Right.
and, you know, tells him that he must be so scared. And so the moment that it clears up is when Yui starts telling Kosuke what happened, where we don't actually see the memory before that. We only see this point where she is telling him what the event was, which kind of the combination of that and the vivid clarity in that portion, as well as how unclear it was immediately before that, indicates to me that this is being used to convey that, like you said, the memory isn't normal because it's a constructed memory. Like he has internalized what Yui told him happened from an event that he likely doesn't remember. And that is the clear point of the memory. And that's why it's so vivid, because he doesn't have to actually remember it. He is remembering what he was told and the feelings that he had that night. And he's putting those together in this burst of clarity.
Right. There's this sort of implication that he did not remember anything about that night except that moment. And again, this goes back to that point where we could argue maybe it's so intense because this is such a strong memory for him. But like, like you're getting at, if that's the case, why doesn't he remember what happened before? Like we are meant to take note of the fact that it's only once Yui enters the picture and starts to, fill him in on her version of what happened that it starts to, come together. I would like to point out an interesting detail too is that he goes from everything being so vague and blurry to Yui in such full detail that we even see those scuff marks on her hand.
Yes. Those
And how,
tiny details.
right. And how very interesting it is that Kousuke clearly is remembering Yui's iteration of what happened, what she told him, what she, you know, created in his mind, and how this has completely propped up his belief that Noel is very unstable and violent. And yet, the fact that he has that very clear memory of what her hand looks like, but that hasn't really factored into anything until now.
And with this particular memory, we consistently get people indicating that it's likely falsified. Kosuke himself says it back in 209, maybe 208, that people who have experienced trauma often form falsified memories to cope. Yujing says, you always talk about how violent Noel was, but do you actually even remember what happened that night? Because he's never talked about the details. And
Right.
the one time that he tells Shin-Ae about it, it's not anywhere near this vivid picture that we got in 210. It's two scribbled spiderwebby figures
Mm-hmm.
arched in like a fighting stance next to each other that, I guess are Kosuke and Noel. But it's almost like, if the 210 memory is the 120 point, that his memory of the actual fight is like the negative 20 point, where he doesn't actually remember it at all, and it's spun in this, like, as if it's a web of lies. Like, the art is illustrating this web of lies in this distortion of the memory, and that is
Right.
also black and white. There's not a single ounce of color in there, and there's not even silhouettes in there. It is literally a black background with white webbing.
Right. It is as vague. Like, we know that there was an altercation, but there is nothing we can glean from it about what that altercation was.
Mm-hmm.
And I think something that continues to support that is that the only the only version of that night that we have from Noel is a completely fragmented, jagged, very blurred version of that night. Um, but where Kosuke's memories of that night are so vague, he doesn't even remember what people were saying. The dialogue is completely blurred out to, show that he does not recall any of this. Noel's dialogue is very clear, it's very bold. He doesn't remember enough about that night. He doesn't, one of the theories that we've thrown around is, if he didn't have his glasses that night, then obviously his recollections are going to be very vague and blurry because he is incredibly nearsighted. So the image of his version of that memory is going to be only what he could actually see. But what is very clear is what he was saying, like him asserting that he didn't even do anything, he just wanted to ask him something. And it really plays back into that concept of everything we know about this night kind of contradicts each other. And the fact that Kosuke has this intensely vivid version of it that only becomes that clear when Yui steps into the picture and starts talking to him about it, and then takes him inside to presumably make a nice comforting cup of tea. There's something about it that tells you this is not a real memory, or at the
Yeah.
very least he does not actually remember what happened. He has been informed of what happened. Like you said when he was talking to Shin-Ae about it, not only does he picture everything in like this vague concept rather than an image, but he also just basically, does what he's always done. He he repeats back what he's been told, like, oh, Noel's very unstable. He doesn't actually say anything. He doesn't say Noel was picking fights with me all the time. He didn't say that Noel was beating kids up in the neighborhood. He just repeats that Noel was an unstable, violent kid who needed help. And I wonder where he might have heard that from.
Mm-hmm. And it's like, yeah, like you said, like the portions of this memory that are so vivid are all just the what he's been told. Like he really doesn't remember any of it. And it's especially a strong contrast when you compare it to what is like if Dieter's the baseline for an accurate memory, the baseline for like a normal memory, like I guess like the 50 point where Quimchee normally falls, is like what we see in her episode recaps, what we see when Noel remembers his conversation with Alyssa on the balcony.
Mm-hmm.
Um, most of like Kousuke's like small childhood memories where it's like you have the normal panels. They look like normal panels, and the color's kind of half drained.
Right.
And
They're very, what's the word I'm looking for? Carry on. I can't think of it.
yeah, the panels are kind of half drained, but there's no overlay onto the color. It's just like a half into that grayscale. And that seems to be, the baseline point for normal memory intensity, no strong emotion associated. So to have Kosuke's memories, which that is the kind of normal spot that he's in when he's remembering events, like when he's remembering his trip to Japan with the crane game lesson, that's the filter that he's using.
Right.
Um,
Desaturated is the word, by the way.
yes,
It just hit me.
desaturated. Yes.
uh,
Yeah, but these are such strong contrasts, not only to Dieter's brand of an accurate memory, but to Quimchee's kind of baseline flashback. So that's kind of the intensity axis. Do you have anything else to add about the memory integrity with the color?
I think you pretty much cover it. I think that's something really important for us to keep in mind about memory, not just in Quimchee's writing, but just in general, is that memory is very, very easily corrupted. And we do kind of see this in the story. Like we see how Kousuke recalls Nessa and how she's completely scribbled out. Like he has distorted his own memory to completely scribble her out so that he doesn't have to see her. Our emotional toll absolutely is going to affect how we remember things. I think we see this the clearest when we talk about the Shin-Lissa flashback, in that Shin-Ae is very pointed in admitting that she only knows her version of the story, and she might not even be remembering it correctly. I tend to assume that she mostly is, but, it is very fair to acknowledge that sometimes we do rewrite our memories. Whether it's that we misremember little details, whether it's the way that our emotions cloud it. Very often, like two people are going to have a very different take on, remembering the same moment just because of how it affected them. We definitely are seeing this with Kousuke and Noel, just in how they remember some of those situations. And the fact that for both of them, it was such a traumatic thing that they don't remember concrete details. And I think those are really good things to keep in mind. I think I've read before, and I've never really looked into this to, know how true it is, but somebody once said that memories are basically like when you take a document and you save it over itself, over and over and over, and how eventually that file is going to become corrupted because of how many times you've saved over it. The more you recollect a memory, the more you're going to start to shift it, just because memories are not a very concrete thing. They are very malleable depending on, again, like our emotions, how traumatic an experience it was. Even good memories, you can start to kind of twist those details, remembering something in a more maybe significant way, or misremembering like, oh, did this happen before that? Things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think Quimchee does a pretty good job of highlighting that for us. But I think, again, the other thing is it's really important to compare those memories. Like we see with Noel and Kousuke's memories, they kind of contradict each other. And neither one of them really lends us a lot of good information. If anything, it's kind of like it gives us enough to start ruling things out and to start questioning how much of what happened that night that we've come to believe is actually true. Um, I think one last point actually I would like to make is how in Shin-Ae's very grayscale memories, their selective color is used a lot. And I believe you said that your
Yes.
theory of this is that these are moments or people that were very important to her. Like, for the longest time, I questioned in her very first major flashback when we see how she left her first school, how she ended up at the new school and met Alyssa. A lot of the color or the selective color we see is in people's eyes. It's
Mm-hmm.
still very desaturated, but you know, if you use a color picker tool, you'll take these, you know, eyes that look like they might be black and find, oh, this is actually more of a red color, and if you lighten it, it would be the actual eye color. And I used to question, why was her father's hat there in the green? Because we know that that hat has had significant moments. But because that's kind of like that moment where she first meets Alyssa, it feels like that's such an important moment. Like what kind of like an anchor point, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm so glad that you brought it up. I can't believe that I forgot about it when I was talking about her as like kind of the 0 point. But another way that that forms is the way that selective color is used in her memories, where, like you said, it's just those really significant items, where, like, you know, in her flashback, it's the sunset, the days that
Mm-hmm.
everything went, like, you know, the day of the fall and the day of like when she was in the hospital. It's people's eyes. It's the jacket on her math teacher that it seems like her teacher wears every day. Um, it's, you know, it's the hat that she still has.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that, you know, has its important moments. And it's the one that really got me and the one that I think tipped me off to the fact that I think that this is how Quimchee is using that selective color in her memory to be like the things that she actually remembers well was that one of the pops of color is the bright red jacket that Minhyuk was wearing when he came and started screaming for her after she fell out of the balcony.
Mm.
Where,
Because it's
like,
such an important moment where somebody's actually there for her and
yes,
is defending her and speaking, or somebody is showing so much actual love and care for her aside from, you know, somebody who's her family.
yeah, like her family and her teacher who have to, you know?
Right.
Where this kid who, you know, she's been kind of becoming friends with comes back from this tournament that he was excited about, that he won, that she missed, that, you know, she wanted to go to, or I don't remember if she said that she could go to it or not, or that she wanted to, but that he invited her to. um, that he comes back, and instead of being focused on anything else, he runs straight to her after she's just had this horrific thing happen to her, this falling out with a friend. um, and
And he's
he's just,
so certain that something has to have happened because he's the
yeah,
only person who really knows, or like everybody knows she's being bullied, but he's like the only person who actually cares about the
yeah,
fact
and
that
he
she's being
says that,
bullied.
you know, he says, I'm the only kid in this school who cares about her, and
That
he's
line
just
makes me
screaming
cry
for
every
her.
time, by the way.
Oh,
Like that moment chokes me up so much, which I think again, like you said, that's why his jacket is shown in that vivid color, is because you know that's like this one little snippet of memory that she caught while she was in and out of consciousness, and
exactly.
it she imprinted so strong on it.
And so I think that, like you said, like that, I think is a really strong indication that this is a way that color is being used, like in tandem with that baseline that we have of flashbacks that don't seem to have strong emotional ties or strong distortion or really strong, like above average accuracy, like those average flashbacks, um, combined with, you know, Dieter as the 100 point, Kousuke as these off the scale points, and Shin-Ae's general memories, where it just feels like that's kind of confirming that, like, when you get just those pops of normal color, like that Dieter type color, that those are things that the characters remember well, that are accurate in their memories.
Right.
And
And I would like to say too with Dieter, part of it probably helps too that his memories are a little more recent,
mhm,
where some of those memories that our characters have are, years ago into their childhood, where we would expect to see them to be much more desaturated and not as very clear and concrete because
yeah.
there's been so much time in between them. Not to say that, this detracts from Dieter's memories or anything, but I think that's kind of like a good thing to keep in mind is that that's probably partly why his memories are considered to be kind of that baseline for us.
And additionally, the memories that Dieter has aren't the kind, like most of our characters, that are attached to some significant trauma.
Right.
So, in addition to the fact that Quimchee does not shy away from using memory distortion tactics like the webs or the scribbles or the inverted colors, um,
Oh, the
she all
inverted colors.
yeah. We're gonna start talking about colors. So she also seems to use the palette overlays to convey emotional connotations. And there's kind of different characters seem to have their own unique palettes for kind of how they contextualize memories in general, but also sometimes their palettes change depending on the context of the memory. So like, Shin-Ae, in addition to the black and white, well, in addition to the gray scale, like the really desaturated gray indicating her kind of poor memory integrity, um, she's also in this very high contrast black and white, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where like, she, like I said before, she kind of lacks context for a lot of her memories. And she also, honestly, for a lot of time has shied away from confronting the emotional connotations of her memories. Like when she's
Mm-hmm.
pulling these things up, she's kind of just pulling them up in a factual sense and in a kind of the world is dreary sense. Um, where she's not really confronting her own emotional reactions as opposed to just the well, these are things that are terrible that happen in the world. Like, she it's
Right. There's the detachment to it.
yes, the detachment exactly. Where like the it's terrible that she was bullied, but she's not really expressing her reaction to the bullying, more so the bullying is terrible and that happened to me. She fell out a window and even as she's falling down, she's doing the like, just close your eyes, you'll be okay. This is a long fall. That detachment, which is also in her memory where she's having these horrific events, but it's just this very high contrast, black and white of like, these are terrible things, these are okay things. And it's just the detachment and the factual of how that happened.
When you put it that way too, when we see Shin-Ae later when she's beating up the bear suit, and how she pictures the people in her mind who have hurt her, she isn't seeing them in that detached, decolored way. We are seeing them
Yeah.
very clearly on a very vivid, bright red background. And that lack of detached, she is very undetached about that. Like in this moment, it is very clear who has hurt her, who has left her with these scars. There is no separating herself from those emotions. Like it is completely enveloped.
Yeah, and she is for the first time acknowledging all of those emotions. Like she she for the first time, like has all these people in color, but especially like it's the only time aside from when Nolte's got the picture that we've seen Alyssa in color. It's one of the few
Mm-hmm.
times that her mother has appeared at all in the comic. Um and like it's on these bright red backgrounds and she afterwards, sees this little version of herself, which is also one of the only times we've seen like little Shin-Ae in color. And she says, I think I need to get help. And her little self is like telling her these things of like, you know, you can't keep running away from it. You can't keep pretending like you're over everything. And like it's, it's all said and past when you're carrying around these scars so hard. And it just really is, like you said, like that, like it's one of the few times that she isn't detaching from those memories, and it really ties into how her flashbacks are oriented. And like Solidarity just said in the chat, like, our girl's dissociative to survive. Like, she
She's
is just,
gotta.
yeah, she's gotta. She is just detaching from all this stuff because she doesn't or didn't have the tools to acknowledge and confront it in a way that felt meaningful or safe.
Right.
Um, and
And
so that's,
and
oh,
or go ahead.
no, you go.
I was just gonna say, the fact that when we do finally see her confronting those feelings, I think it very much confirms how she's compartmentalized all of that, and that's why
Mm-hmm.
it is her younger self who is saying all of this to her, because she has packed all of this away, and she said, you know what, I'm not gonna deal with that. There's nothing I can
Yeah.
do about it, so we're gonna move forward. And we can see that every effort she's made to move forward has never really advanced her forward until that moment.
Yeah. Like, and like you said, like, it's all packed away neatly in her younger self. And that's why her younger self is like, it's me that you need to confront. Like,
Right.
you're afraid of me. Because she had those reactions, like, she packed away all of those reactions in that younger self. And there's an interesting play in the way that Nola's involved, both in that scene and later on, where when they're talking on the balcony, I think she says that she's moved on, and he says, and I could be mixing the two of them up, because for the sake of this, it doesn't necessarily, like, it does matter who said what, but for the context of why I'm bringing this up, it's not as important. Where one of them says that, that you're moving on and it's okay, and the other says, the fact that you're still thinking about it means that you haven't, like, gotten over it, and it'll always be a part of you. You never get rid of it, you never let
Mm-hmm.
go of it, it's always part of you.
I
And
believe you're right. It was Shin-Ae saying that she has, and Noel's the one who's pointing out that he's like, I don't think you really have, but okay.
yeah, we're like, yeah, I forgot how I started this sentence, but it's that concept of, like, she's dissociated away from it, but it is a part of her, and it's not going away as much as she black and whites it out. Um,
I think for
and
Shin-Ae, part of it is the concept of helplessness is a really big
mhm,
factor in this, because she kind of has this mentality that if there's nothing that she herself can do to concretely change anything, what's the point in dwelling on it? And
yes,
in that, in carrying that mentality, she does obviously come to ignore things, compartmentalize, and pack them away. Her younger self is pointing out that, Shin-Ae very much is very angry with herself for how things went. I think, in a sense, she does blame herself. Sometimes
yes,
in cases where she, there's nothing she could have done, like the bullying in the first school was very completely out of her hands.
and
But
I
she
just
points, oh, go on.
oh, I was just going to interject and say that that comes out really strongly in how the one way that she did acknowledge and, like, in her way, deal with and, like, respond to the situation was by deciding that she wasn't going to be a burden to anyone anymore. Where she
Right,
really does internalize that, like, there's nothing that she can do to prevent it, like, to do anything about it to help it, but also that she is in some way at fault for it. Like, it is
right.
her.
And I think we do see that. I don't think it's like made explicitly clear, but I do think that we see that in her memories of Alyssa, where because she did not have that closure, because she doesn't understand what actually happened, she doesn't understand why Alyssa was so hot and cold and wishy-washy. And I think part of that anger is, maybe it was something she did. Maybe she did bring all of this upon herself. As readers, I think we obviously know that it is far more nuanced than that. But I think that is a very big part of why she packs these away. Is like maybe she got hurt because, she was this very headstrong, reckless kid who would rush into these moments, like she's just out here trying to get her bag back. And like she's literally out
Yeah.
walking on the window ledge, which, like that in itself was already dangerous. Um, and it's very hard, as we have talked a lot in various mediums. It's very difficult to contend with yourself and really reconcile the mistakes that you may have made in the past And for Shin-Ae, it's a lot easier to be like, well, nothing is going to change if I confront this. So I'm just going to tuck all of this away and carry on. And as you can see, things don't go away.
Yes. And I think also, like, to touch like even more on that point with Alyssa, where like in addition to like not having the other side of the story, not really knowing what happened, um like she says all the time that she doesn't hold any hard feelings towards Alyssa, that she hopes Alyssa is doing well, that she wants that closure, she wants to kind of clear the air between them. But ultimately, she doesn't view or feel like Alyssa is a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
And she also doesn't understand what the catalyst was for everything that happened, because, like you said, it was far more nuanced than, a single action or anything like that. And it involved a lot of things going on internally for Alyssa that Shin-Ae wasn't privy to, that she couldn't be privy to, but she knows that Alyssa is not a bad person. And for anyone out there who is going to contest that, Alyssa is not a bad person. She is a person experiencing a lot of trauma who has made a lot of choices that had bad results. But we don't ever actually see her having bad intentions. We see her failing often at having good intentions, which I talked about in the past, about how I actually feel like she's kind of similar to Rand in where she often tried to make a third option where there wasn't one that
Mm-hmm.
would get everyone everything. And it's just not possible.
I
But
think.
because oh
Oh, carry on. I'll let you finish
oh
that.
okay, I was gonna say, but because Shin-Ae doesn't view Alyssa as a bad person, but also can't figure out what went wrong, the kind of default conclusion that she's left with is that I did something wrong. There's something wrong with me
Mm-hmm.
that led to this, that caused this, because she's not a bad person, and I couldn't pinpoint any specific moment where everything went wrong. Therefore, it was me. It was a problem with me because there's no other way that she can rationalize it.
I think it's really difficult for people, and I don't mean just Shin-Ae, I mean people in general, even readers, to deal with a situation where there is nobody to blame. Because I think in
Mm-hmm.
general, we are brought up to assume that there's always a right and a wrong, there's a good and a bad, there is somebody who causes something. And in a situation like that where there's no closure, there's no clarity, there's not even that sense of right or wrong, or who did something that was wrong. And it's really, really hard to deal with that. I was going to say, I think we see that concept about Alyssa, like how Shin-Ae sees that Alyssa was not in the wrong. We see that that is very heavily paralleled with Null, where Null is literally, blocking his friends, refusing to talk to them, ignoring them, very pointedly hurting them. And Shin-Ae still does not really hold that against him. Not in like a major sense. Like
Yeah.
obviously she acknowledges that he's kind of being a dick, but she also acknowledges that he must have his reasons. And I think we see that that's very similar with how she views Alyssa, is that she must have her reasons. And like Shin-Ae's, she's got just enough information in her memories to kind of start to poke at it if she wanted. Like in the past, Shin-Ae did mention Alyssa's family, and like Alyssa really flipped about that.
Yeah.
I think even though she doesn't have that full closure and understanding, she does acknowledge that both of these characters who have hurt her must have had some kinds of reason. And I think that's why we can see that Shin-Ae isn't completely blaming herself by the time it happens with Null. Is because, like, if this is happening again, maybe it isn't about me.
Mm-hmm. And like going back to kind of the use of color, and in that scene where she gets so angry, um, she, like we said, this is, the time that we see child Alyssa fully colored, and she is one of the like really prominent figures in this, because Shin-Ae does carry a lot more hurt from the Shinlissa event than she lets on. and she's never dealt with it because of that. Like, she doesn't view Alyssa as a bad person, but this event
Mm-hmm.
was so horrible and hard for her that she has a lot of trouble rectifying that, and she does carry some resentment towards Alyssa, shown by how she pops up there, but she just doesn't know what to do with that because of that lack of closure. Whereas with Noel, when this is happening again, she both has a bit more experience and a bit more insight to recognize, A, this isn't a problem with me, and
Mm-hmm.
B, she's able to kind of see where he's coming from more. Like, she understands Noel a lot more than she understood Alyssa, both by virtue of she and Noel are more similar, and she is older and has a bit more wisdom to give, where she is able to have that perspective where she doesn't blame herself and she doesn't carry as much deep hurt from it, where Noel is the first name that she mentions when she starts hitting this bear, but she doesn't picture him. You know, he's
Right.
not there. His colored portrait doesn't show up because he's not actually a part of that deep hurt for her.
Right. I feel like that's such a it was such an interesting thing for Quimchee to insert and the way she did. Like how it kind of goes chronologically for who's hurting her, but I think it also starts to read about how intimate the hurt is. Because like Kosuke is the very first person she actually
Mm-hmm.
pictures. And Kosuke hasn't really hurt her on an intimate level. And we've also seen that she kind of has that sense about Kosuke that he is a person who lacks a lot of experiences. He was somebody who was very sheltered, and
Mm-hmm.
she kind of acknowledges that a lot of the ways he does hurt people is kind of like rooted in his upbringing. We go next to Yui, who obviously has caused so much more hurt. And then like the fact that Alyssa's the next person after that, and Alyssa is that person who is the root for, well, okay, not the root, but like she's like that final root for her abandonment issues.
She
Because,
sealed it
next
all
is her
in.
mother. Right. Like Alyssa was the one who just turned it into like a whole extreme thing, and how that, directly parallels to Noel. And then right, seeing, her mother and her father and the fact that she still carries so much unaddressed resentment. And I think part of it is Shin-Ae is the kind of person who she kind of does for others what she wishes others would do for her. She gives them that benefit of the doubt. She excuses people because that's all she's ever been able to do. She's never really confronted things until Noel.
And
And
she's oh, I was gonna say, she's never really had the opportunity
mhm,
to confront things in that, like, deep emotional level, because I mean, how would she? Like,
right,
her thing is that everyone abandons her or, like, bullies her, and, like,
right,
how do you actually confront those issues? Like, they're, as much as she has that, like, feeling of helplessness in these situations and, like, carries that emotionally to make her helpless in the response she has, which she's not actually helpless in that vein, she is often helpless in the situation of being able to confront and understand the problem.
right. And that does make it difficult. Like again, how do you get closure and heal and move on when you don't have it? In her case, it's going to be the kind of thing where she probably is going to have to learn how to let go of those and just accept that these are doors that closed before she got the chance to have that information. But, for where she stands at that moment, it's so difficult to get your head around the fact that she might never understand, like that is life in general. Like we may end this story with Shin-Ae having absolutely no closure with her mom, and why did her mom not only leave but separate them the way that she did?
Yeah.
Why did her mom not even write to her? Like the fact that it was like such a clean break where it's like her mom was never there. Like no visitation, no gifts, not even
Not even
little
knowing if
letters or
she's alive or
cards.
dead.
Right, right. Um, and I think that is definitely going to be a very big hurdle for Shin-Ae is ultimately in life we have to contend with things like that. I think I've talked a lot about how Shin-Ae and Alyssa are very similar situations to what people go through in their own lives, and how sometimes you just have to let it go and accept that there are probably other circumstances that we didn't know about or that we didn't see. And, you've just got to be able to let go of something in order to move on. Shin-Ae's never really let go. She just stuffed it deep down, but she's
Yeah.
still holding on to it.
She's dragging it around behind her and pretending it's not there.
Ah, Shin-Ae, you got so much baggage.
Oh, but kind of coming back, so that's like the way that Shin-Ae's color palette manifests. But other people have their own color palettes, and so like one of the big ones that ties into another theory is the brown palette. And we see this in Soshi's whole flashback, as well as the flashback when Kousuke meets Null and is running away from him. And so the kind of original color theory and so I, as a disclaimer, I am not good at analyzing the use of color in I Love You in general. I've caught onto it in the flashbacks, but what was very helpful in sorting through and kind of confirming what I felt like the colors mean in the flashbacks has been past analyses of colors in other senses. So like one of them was the Rand eyes theory, and this was a really old theory on back on the Amino before it locked, which is why I don't have the credit for it right now. If I can find it, I'll put it in the description probably. Um, but it was the theory that in the early episodes of I Love You, Rand's eyes start out almost entirely brown. And when they start transitioning to green is when he starts kind of defying Yui and making his own decisions and like more overtly protecting his sons again. It also ties into how he wears his like jackets and his vests, where they get more open as his eyes get more green. But basically the brown fades away, the less kind of trapped by Yui Rand feels and acts. And I think that ties in interestingly to the use of brown as a palette overlay in the flashbacks, because it shows up in Soshi's memories and in that memory with Kousuke. And in Soshi's memories, we're literally watching the process of how he got shackled into being Kosuke's spy, where he starts out and he's essentially like he's um tied down by these people bullying him. His family is tied down by their financial hardships. Like he really is shackled to his circumstances with like nothing that he can do about it, where he's not so much having a like a strong reaction to events like Kosuke sometimes does, or like Shin-Ae sometimes does, where there's specific big events, but it's kind of like his whole life has this theme of like, there's something keeping you tied down, um
Right. Interesting.
and then as this flashback goes on, like I said, it's the process of him becoming Kosuke's spy, and the way that Kosuke gets him to do this is essentially by shackling him to him, where he starts to make these other um obstacles in Soshi's life go away, where he's paying off the bullies, he's offering financial compensation that could help his sister, that could help his family, but in exchange Soshi has to become his spy and the watchdog for this kid that he doesn't know and at this point doesn't want to be involved with. And he eventually says yes to it and is becomes shackled to Kosuke as his spy, and kind of even furthering in on the brown, and this is just a note that I wrote. Kosuke's even toting around a brown umbrella on these rainy days, where he looms over Soshi and offers him this deal. So like that combined with the Rand eyes theory, which the Rand eyes theory I feel like is one of those ones that sounds kind of like really out there when you first hear it, but if you like when you actually look at Rand's eyes throughout the early comic, it really checks out. And I think his eyes have been very green for the past while, but they were so brown at first, and it was really a gradual shift as he started moving away from Yui's control. So it really feels like brown. is kind of this like shackled color, this also kind of dishonest color, and this like fearful color, where like the person is like afraid of the circumstances around them and the consequences of them, and therefore is being dishonest with people as well as being shackled to something.
Do
Um,
you, do you think that applies only for the memories? Because, like you said, like Rand's eyes, or the fact that Kousuke is very often in a brown coat,
I think that it
like
applies.
very often, like that's
Yeah,
his thing.
I definitely think that it applies outside of memories. I think that she's using the way that she normally uses color within the memories, but like I said, I'm not super great at analyzing color, especially because that feels like a monumental task in
Right.
a comic with the length and depth of I Love You. Um,
Also,
so
I'm just gonna put it out there about color that so much of like color theory is very much like it's so subjective and
yeah.
sometimes cultural that
Hmm.
I don't personally delve into it that much. Like I don't think it's necessarily always that, like Quimchee is like sitting here deciding, okay, I want this character to dress in something. Let me go look up these colors and see what they signify. I think I've said before that when I talk about color, a lot of the times it has to do with like if something seems very pointed or I look at it in an emotional way, but again, not
Yeah.
necessarily in a like, okay, blue can represent calmness, but it can also represent sadness. It's more like, what do I think is trying to be conveyed here? And I think that's one of those
Yeah.
things where when it comes to symbology and color theory, I think we always have to apply like acknowledge that they take everything with a grain of salt because while we do know Quimchee is very deliberate about a lot of things, I think there's a limit to that deliberateness,
Yeah.
um
And
like
that's
so, sometimes characters have a color palette, and I do think we've seen interesting things where like when we first meet or when Yujing comes and meets Shin-Ae and everybody like we meet her for the first time like for real, not counting the time that she helped Shin-Ae get dressed. Like the fact that she's kind of wearing like
when she's
Null
introduced.
and right, like the fact that she's wearing Null and Shin-Ae colors, like something like that
Yes.
is very interesting. But like it's not something where I think like like oh Null has geese and whale on his desk at work. I wonder what these mean. Sometimes I'm like sometimes things are just there.
And
Like
it's like color is one of those ones where like everything has to have a color, right? Like
right,
you have to put a color on everything. So every single use of a certain color can't be meaningful or necessarily mean the same thing. But I definitely
right.
think that Kimchi has like ideas behind her colors, and when there's an important moment, she definitely puts certain colors. So that's like I do think this holds, but I am not going to be the person who combs through every panel of I Love You and like creates the grand color theory. Many
Right.
other people have tried. Um, some people have gotten really good ideas. Some are long, some are short, and I am not going to be that person. I will not do it justice. But in
I
the
think
context of oh
I was just gonna say, I think the other thing with color theory too is that, honestly, you can swing anything to mean something,
oh yeah
and that is the thing. It's like sometimes it's like, was this a coincidence? Was this intentional? Was it just like you found an interpretation that happens to fit? And I think sometimes we see this when people start to like kind of pick at things and are like, oh, I wonder if this has any meaning. And then like they go and Google something and they're like, oh, here's this really obscure band who did this like song and blah blah blah. I'm like, do you really think that that's the thing though? And I do think I'm not saying that no color has meaning, obviously. I think, like we see it a lot in how she uses background colors often if it's not, something that is like very color palette oriented because, sometimes you use this light blue background because it suits what the character is wearing a lot more and, but yeah,
yeah
like right, I'm with you on that. There's important things to glean from color. I think the fact of like brown kind of signifying that concept of trapped is interesting because I think it could potentially apply to Shin-Ae and her father's jacket and how we see her start to shrug that off
oh
and wear it less as she starts to become more comfortable with who she is as a person and what she's doing in life. I
That's
think that one
actually
is
really
interesting.
interesting, especially with how she talks about it at the formal and literally is
Hmm.
like, this is my like comfort blanket. This is my home. This is, I hate being here. I'm trapped here. And like, this is, and, everyone throughout the night is trying to take it from her.
Hmm.
And this is a whole other analysis. Um, so I'm gonna stop myself, but that's really interesting. And yeah, so what I was gonna say also is like, while I am not the person who will analyze color in general in I Love You, the scope of flashback color is a lot smaller and it's a lot more
Hmm.
deliberate, so it's a lot easier for me to pick apart color in this context, which is why I feel comfortable doing it in this context. And I will say, like, I do think that the connotations of these colors very likely hold outside of flashbacks, but I am not going to make I'm not going to slam my gavel and say this is what it is. um but the
I do
other
think
thing,
when it comes to the colors and flashbacks, so I do think that is something that you're very right about. And that again, it's less about like what does this particular color mean, and more about what are the commonalities and the contradictions between things, and
yes,
what can we glean from them, and how that gives us that read on emotional integrity and emotional or memory integrity and memory emotional intensity.
emotional context probably.
Yeah.
But touching upon that, like continuing there, in the realm of Brown and like the connections between memories, because one of the big things is like, does this hold outside of a specific character's memory, outside of one memory for the character? And so in addition to the Brown being used in Soshi's flashback as well as in Rand's eyes, it's also used in Kosuke's flashbacks. So first, there's also like Kosuke in Soshi's flashback is also trapped and shackled, by this
Hmm.
guardianship of Null that he doesn't want, that he's trying to pawn off. But in his own flashback, when he meets Null and he's running away from Null and has this like giant kind of dark color blob shadow following him as he's like running away. And I forget what he's saying, but he's like trying to comfort himself as he's running away. It starts out with kind of a blue tint to it. And as it gets bigger and Kosuke runs farther and farther and, falls further and further into this anxiety and this what is going to be a future shackled Null, it gets larger and more brown. And so I feel like that really ties in with the use of brown in Soshi's flashback and in Ren's eyes, and kind of, for me, solidifies the idea that this brown tint is likely that kind of like shackling, dishonesty, fear connotation to memories.
I never really noticed that color background changed like that. That is interesting. Poor
Um,
Kosuke.
Poor Kosuke. Kosuke actually has a lot of diversity in his flashbacks, which is really interesting because a lot of our characters are fairly stagnant in how they remember things. But Kosuke, he gets around. And I feel like it's really that like Kosuke is the character, honestly, with the most emotional volatility,
Hmm.
because his reality is so shaky, the history of his life is so shaky, who he is as a person is so shaky, and all of that has fluctuated so much throughout different moments that I think it's really reflected in the way that his flashbacks are colorized.
As
um
a fellow Scorpio, I would just like to point out that, Kosuke is a Scorpio and we just can't help being the intense creatures that we are.
I was going to shout this out while we were switching topics because I realized that I didn't say it at the beginning because I was too focused on getting an intro. But it is someone's birthday today.
Oh boy, I wonder who.
Our friendly neighborhood Scorpio Ashley is having her birthday. Happy birthday. This
Yay!
is way more awkward than I expected because we have an audience of people, but they're all muted. Everyone say happy birthday in the chat.
We, we give like
If
that 5-second delay for people to respond.
I know. If you're not typing in the chat happy birthday, you are leaving me hanging. And I can't handle that.
I think people are leaving you hanging. It's okay. It's okay.
Ouch. Um, yeah, but happy birthday. We're having birthday pod night. Get to celebrate
Birthday
with the crew.
pod. This is actually like the first time I've actually really celebrated my birthday with the, I love you crew. Because like I wasn't really involved in Discord servers last year, so
Yeah.
yeah.
It's a wonderful day for our wonderful Ashley, and we're so grateful that she was put on this earth to have brain rot with us.
I've just put on this earth to singularly have I love you brain rot and never shut up about it.
That is truly our life's calling. Oh my gosh, Solidarity left and came back and said trying to type in the chat ruined her headphone setting.
How does
Uh,
that even why is Discord so cruel to you? Like
I don't know, but at least that means that I was not completely left hanging. um, but yeah. Okay. Um, kind of as everyone wishes you a happy birthday, as they should. Kind of tying together, um, like these color palettes. So I talked a lot about Shin-Ae's use of color and about brown. We also see that a lot of the times when a character is remembering like those kind of blanket traumatic memories, and specifically Noel and Kousuke, they actually have a lot of similarities in the way they remember. We have that like yellow tint overlay, kind of like an old photo. Um, and on Patreon, Quimchee literally released a panel from Kosuke's memory without that overlay, titled "The Memory Without the Trauma." So I have it on good authority that that kind of yellow, um, almost like old sheet music, which I guess is particularly poetic with 212. Color overlay is like I don't have a really good description of it, but I mean if you've read anything with Kosuke and Noel's memories, that brand of trauma tied to a memory seems to be that color overlay. And so we just kind of have this recurring theme of different color palettes being used to give the memory a kind of blanketed emotional context over it. And once again, we don't see this in Dieter's memories. Dieter's memories that are said to be the most accurate, kind of the most just as if you were in the event, like in a regular panel of I Love You. We He doesn't have these color overlays in those memories.
I think a really good point about that and how it differs from Shin-Ae's recollections is that, again, like we've seen that Shin-Ae is very detached from hers, whereas Kosuke and Noel cling to theirs. Like,
Yes.
there is no escaping their trauma. Their trauma is very much a part of who they are. It is so bonded to them that they can't compartmentalize. Like, Noel may wear a mask, but that's all it is he's just masking. He's not shoving those away. Like, his trauma affects him on that daily level. Kosuke's trauma affects him in everything he does. And I think
Yes.
that's why we don't see those kinds of distortions in Shin-Ae's memories. Like again, she's got that
He's
detachment and
detached.
she doesn't hold on to it. It's not smothering her like it's smothering Kosuke and Noel. Like they're literally being smothered by those memories. And so
Yes.
there's no way for their recollections to ever compare to what Shin-Ae's or like even Dita's look like because it is just so entrenched in the trauma, in the emotions, in all of that kind of hurt.
Yes, absolutely. And to kind of like go like on the like very intense side of this, and this is kind of veering into memories combined with distortion. So like not true recollection because it's being intentionally distorted, which is interesting that some memories are unintentionally distorted and some are intentionally distorted. Although memory distortion, in my opinion, is a little more obvious as to the context, so I don't feel the need to really harp on it here. But we also very often get these like uses of bright red in the flashbacks, right? Specifically around Yui. Um, So, like, just another instance of, like, there is a very specific emotional connotation that remembering an experience with Yui brings you, and that is that bright red, and it's often accompanied by distortions of her as the devil, or her as the puppet master. And so
Yeah.
it just
Evil.
feels, yeah, evil, and it just feels like a really, hit you over the head with the idea that the way that memories are colorized matters, and that the way that they matter is in this emotional context.
Right. I just went back on Patreon and found the post that you were talking about. Yeah, that says a lot. um,
Yeah, it's Quimchee is basically, not to say that Quimchee is basically confirming my theory, but at least that aspect she's basically,
right. Like trauma obviously is going to affect the way that a memory is recalled. Like whether or not Quimchee, admits it. It's just that's just how it is. Like I feel like that string of memories in 64, 65 really supports this, and for me, like that was the thing that made it such a concrete theory, not just something that I subscribe to, but something that I'm like, I think that this is 100% true. Is, watching how Shin-Ae's memories gradually became more saturated as we went back further through the night to the points that she could clearly recall the moments where, like that is probably what the baseline memory looked like. And just watching how they deteriorate, how they distort. I think we also saw that in the mid-season or the
Yeah,
mid-series trailer, is like again recollecting that night and just like the actual distortion accredited to those different moments versus like the things that she could remember a little more clearly. And how I think even in that memory, we saw, like how some of that trauma slowly was seeping into some of those. All in all,
absolutely.
it's one of my favorite theories. I think it applies to literally every memory that we have seen and that we're going to continue to see. And I think it gleans a lot in the manner of subtext. There's so much that Quimchee tells us without ever coming out and outright saying it. And her use of color and distortion in memories is meant to tell us that. Like again with Noel's memory of the night that he was taken away, I very, very strongly feel like the fact that he remembers the dialogue so clearly, but the imagery itself is like clearly because he did not have his glasses. And the fact that the colors are inverted definitely makes us wonder, like, had he been drugged prior to this, or is it just the sheer intensity of how wronged and scared he was at a moment where he literally cannot recall what he was seeing? And how, again, we're supposed to apply, if Noel couldn't see anything in that memory, what should we assume about what led up to him being taken away? Stuff like that.
Exactly. And like, I remember when I kind of first developed this theory, because 210 was what brought this theory out. I
Yes.
saw
I
that
remember
mem-
the discussion. I was
yeah,
there.
I saw that vividry in Kosuke's memory, and I just went, something is wrong here, and I think I know what it is. Um, and like, I remember we went back and forth in paragraphs, and I just remember weeks and weeks later, you came back and replied to a weeks old thread, and we're like,
It was at
64
least
and
a month.
65. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it was at least a month. And you brought up that, that post formal Shin-Ae trying to remember the formal after being drugged. And it, like, I know I've said a ton all over the I Love You spaces that, I've been trying to write up this theory for a very long time. But in trying to be comprehensive about it, it's just taken me forever because there's so many flashbacks, and this, like you said, I think it tracks throughout all of them. So it feels really good to put it out there,
Yes.
to
And
have.
honestly, like I have that memory, like it's literally at the back of my mind all the time when I'm reading. So I hope that it's kind of a theory that other people will also hold as they read and start to be like, "Oh, you know what? I totally see what she was talking about."
And like you said, like, I think it just subtextually adds so much to the context of the memories, and like how we read them, and can tell us so much if if this is how Quimchee is using.
Right. Like, I Love You is, in general, all around, it is a story that is largely told in subtext as much as it is told, straight up textually. Quimchee would not show memory in such different ways if she did not want us to glean these kinds of things. Like, it would be so easy to put every flashback into a grayscale. Because I remember thinking that was the case, because as we were seeing Shin-Ae's memories, they were all in like
Yeah.
this grayscale with, subdued color. And then, we kind of saw that with some of, or did we? I need to go back and look at Kousuke's early memories of like
It's
the cake.
It's more grayscaled than
Okay.
his recent ones,
But it's still
but it's like,
desaturated. There's still
yeah.
color.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's still color, and it's more similar to his Japan memory than anything else. So, like, it's
Right.
kind of in between Shanae's memories and his Japan memory. Where, yeah, like, she developed this, she definitely has a baseline for flashbacks, like we were talking about in those, like, you know, that desaturation of the formal in some of her, like, here's what happened on I Love You recaps before episodes, like, right after her hiatuses in the mid-season trailer. Like, she has that baseline, but she chooses to essentially not use it and give us all of these different context flashbacks.
Right. I feel like if she did not want this stuff to be read into, she definitely would have drawn them differently. And
Yeah,
again,
it would
it's
have been
just
so much less effort.
right. And again, like, this is the kind of thing about when it comes to theories for me. And like I said, how, with color theories, sometimes I feel like sometimes we're just picking at things and arbitrarily trying to assign some kind of meaning to it. Whereas it's things like this where it's very clear that it is deliberately done differently, where, even characters themselves don't always maintain the same kind of saturation levels or color palette in their memory. It means we are supposed to read more into that. And as we go back and reread more, we're supposed to start to see a lot of that.
Absolutely. And so, unless you have anything else to add, I feel like that concludes the flashback theory.
Which only took us an hour and a half.
I didn't realize that this is why the post is taking me so long.
See, right though, it's so in depth. And I am very glad that we are finally doing an episode where we can sit and talk about it, because it's just such an important thing in how memory is used and what the story is telling us through the memories that we're supposed to see. And so in lieu of writing out that monumental, enormous essay, at least this exists to hopefully convey some of
It's
this
here.
to people who are listening.
Yeah. And so, with the flashback theory done and an hour and a half in, what would we like to do?
There's a part of me that is like, should we save the rest of the theories for the next episode and call this one good, or do we want to like dive into any of them? Because I'm going to say I think the rest of these theories all tie heavily into each other, and I don't
I
think we can
agree.
do one and not the others without kind of disrupting the flow.
I agree. I'm kind of having the same thought, especially because before our hard cutoff of 2 hours, we only have a half hour left. And I feel like
Right.
if we just spent an hour and a half on the flashback theory,
Right.
how spoiler alert, a lot of it's about
The
the
formal.
the formal and the Kims and Yui. Like, if we spent an hour and a half on flashback colors,
Right.
how are we gonna in any meaningful way cover those topics in a half hour?
Yeah, I think it's a lot better to cut it here. That way we can dedicate the next episode completely to those. And then this gets to stand as like
The
the
flashback
episode
theory.
that covers the flashback theory in great detail.
Yay, not a post but a podcast. Listen to it in auditory form on a commute near you.
Yeah, I think that sounds good to me.
All right. Well, with that, we have covered our topic um for the night.
If
Um,
you guys have any more questions or thoughts about the flashback theory, please go ahead and put them in the Trashellie discussion channel, and we can have a look at those and respond to them and incorporate them or answer questions or something. I know like Elle and I have discussed this so much that to me it feels like such an inherently believed thing that I don't know, like if there are things that we're missing that people are like, oh, what about this? Or what do you think this could possibly mean?
yeah,
I will
if any
point
listeners like have anything, yeah, drop it in the chat. Please
I will
continue. I
point
cut you off.
out oh, it's okay. I was gonna say I will point out like you said, we are not really big on color theorizing ourselves. So like, is there significance to the color of the elements that people are wearing in Shin-Ae's flashback that get selective color? I don't know. To me, I'm just kind of like, this is the character's color palette, and she just remembers this little detail about them because it was a significant moment or they were a person who was significant in some way. Maybe there is something more that we are not getting, and one day we can ask Quimchee. I don't know. But I will point out, those aren't the questions that I can answer for you.
Yeah. There's specifically in the context of flashbacks and what the overall palette means. Um,
Yeah, we can
yeah.
answer like what do we think this means psychologically? We can answer what do we think this means for the character or their emotions. Color, that's not me.
Yeah.
That's not us.
And it looks generally like we don't really have questions. So I'm going to say once again, happy birthday.
Thank you. I'm really glad that I got to celebrate my birthday with the I Love You community because, as I've said before, this has been such a very comfortable and welcoming community and fandom for me that I've been really, really happy to be a part of for, I'm pretty sure it is literally years now at this point, which is really shocking. But I'm really glad that, or let me say that better. I'm really grateful that there are so many people in the fandom who really like listening to the things I say, and I mean that whether on the podcast or writing my long rambling posts on Reddit or Tumblr. Oh, also while I'm here, I would like to also give a shout out to everybody who goes and listens to this on YouTube from Tumblr because every time I get comments from people about the fact that you guys are looking forward to it or really enjoyed it, it makes me feel really, really happy. Again, Tumblr I Love You community has been like my home for so long that it just feels really, really good that I get to kind of cross these over and I get to continue to share my insight and my thoughts with people. And the fact that people are just willing to listen at all just continues to blow me away. So, once again, thank you to everyone out there who goes, oh, look at that, another 2-hour Trashellie podcast. Let's dig in.
And like, God, we love everyone, and like I love this fandom, and since it's your birthday, I'm going to speak very specifically and say that I am so glad that you found I Love You and that you are here and spreading all of your I Love You passion all over all of the socials. And like, I know that I'm theoretically biased because obviously we're friends and we share a brain and we even have a combined name, we're Trashellie. But like, I just feel like you're such a positive presence in the I Love You fandom. And like, I know a lot of people call you the backbone of the fandom. And like, I'm not going to impart that on you because I think that that is a like very like a high pressure thing to be. But I do feel like the I Love You fandom has become better because you joined it. So happy birthday. And I'm glad that you spent it with us.
Thank you. I see this is why I like this community so much. This is why I love being here. Um it's funny because I started just when I found out that there's that weekly post on Reddit that goes up every week where people just drop their thoughts. And I just like slowly started building mine up more and more. Like at one point in time I was like, you know what? It's okay. You can unleash everything. And I really liked that there was such a good reception for it that it wasn't seen as somebody being like weird and rambling and dramatic, but was it feels weird to say it myself, but I do feel like there's a sort of contagiousness about it.
There
The
is.
that sense of everyone feeling free to express themselves and not just necessarily have to make themselves sound smart. Sometimes we just want to talk about our feelings. And I'm very glad that I have been able to be a person who can help encourage that and bring more of that to the community.
And not to turn the end of the pod into the talking about how much we love Ashley, but this is our pod and I'll do with it what I want. But I do feel like you said, it's a contagious thing. And I know that I would not be in the same place in the fandom if we hadn't started talking. Just the way that your emotional, contextual passion for I Loved You and the way that you write influences the way that other people think and write. I think it's I do think that it's brought out a really something unique in the fandom. And I wouldn't be sitting here talking for an hour and a half about the emotional context of flashback colors if we hadn't been going back and forth on Reddit and such. So I feel like, the way that you talk plays off of other people really, really well and does inspire a lot of really good conversation. And this is not to say that, the I Love You fandom is limited to 1 to 5 people, right? Because it's a group thing, it's a collaborative thing. But today's Ashley's birthday, so today I'm being sappy about Ashley.
I do love the collaborative effort of it too. That's definitely the reason that I'm still here.
Absolutely.
It's just getting to talk to so many different people, and the people who become staples and faces that you, or faces, loosely, not actual faces that you recognize. The fact that sometimes you'll go months without somebody responding, and then you're like, oh, hey, they're commenting again. Yeah, that is one of the nice things about having a smaller fandom, is that we do have that kind of sense of community spread across Reddit, Tumblr, and Discord. And I really appreciate it so much.
Yeah, and I know it's no secret that the I Love You fandom has had a very peppered past. And genuinely used to be one of the worst out there, but I feel like it's gotten to, if you don't count the webtoon comments.
Webtoon comments are just no one counts that.
They're a separate entity. I feel like it's gotten to a really good place, and this is not specific to Ashley Birthday. This is to everyone who participates in the I Love You fandom in any way on any platform. I feel like it has gotten to this really good place and this intimate place, and just there's so much of a community fostered and positive support of other people and help conduct your discussions, and I love it. It's so good. I love where it's at.
Me too. And I think it does help a lot where we are in the story and how much information we're really starting to get on different characters, on different events. A lot of that insight that up until recently had only been speculation and now is something that we can more concretely see. I think stuff like that has helped. And also, I'm going to put it out there, I think it helps that we can tell how much Quimchee has enjoyed writing the story again. We can feel her love and passion for it back. And I think that definitely bleeds off onto us and how excited we get to continue reading it as well. Which is why webtoons, you better get your shit together. We want our story back.
PSA to any webtoon employees out there, let her bring it back. Yeah. That's my solemn plea. Not sponsored by Quimchee. But yeah, and with that is the Flashback Theory.
I'm so glad that that one's finally going out into the world and that more people will get to listen to it.
Weight off my shoulders. Exhale. Yeah. Yay.
Thank you, everybody who tuned in, and to those who had to drop out early as well, and to anyone who is going to be listening to this on YouTube.
We love everyone.
And we appreciate you all so much. We're so thankful that you're out there.
All right. That's all, folks.
We'll talk again in 2 weeks.
Ooh.